Joining them on the panel this evening is Nkiru Chime. She is the MD Infragora Advisory, Infragora Global Capital. Please, let's welcome her on stage. Thank you so much. And lastly, I'll invite the only man on the panel tonight is Olamide Fagbuji, the SSA to the President on Climate Technology. Please, we can do better, really. I know some of us are fasting, but you can also, it can be better. Thank you so much, dear panelists, for honoring our invitation to speak on this important topic. And thank you to our audience. Please, let's sit back and enjoy the session. If you need to use the restroom, you just straight down the hall to your right. And if you have any questions, please meet anyone at the registration table. Thank you so much and enjoy the session. Over to you, moderator.
Okay, yes, I'm audible. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion. It promises to be I can say that it will be an explosive, interaction as we have lined up, the panelists who are experts in their field, as Blessing had earlier introduced everyone. I was hoping that we'll have a small talk about economic growth and climate action, just to open discussions, but because I know that we're trying to manage time, I will just ask the panelists, starting from Olumide, to give opening remarks, just broadly, about the topic, and then we can move on to begin to interact with questions. I do not know. Okay, Blessing didn't do that, so let me do it for her. We will today, for this panel discussion, we will be discussing balancing economic growth and climate action in Nigeria. And the objective of this dialogue will be to strengthen, we would like to discuss, strengthening policy integration for climate resilience, for strengthening policy integration for climate resilient economic growth, to promote green growth and low carbon development, enhance climate adaptation and resilience for vulnerable communities, and the part that I always like, mobilize climate finance and foster public-private partnerships. We all agree that, these are very important touch points that we will be discussing about today. So I will quickly move on, starting from Mr. Olamide, so that everyone can give, just very brief opening remarks generally, and then we can kick off to start.
All right. Thank you very much, Salamatu. It's great to be here. I think my name is Olamide Fagbuji, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Climate Technology. What I wanted to really highlight is the need for the government has an imperative to grow the economy, and we have outlined specific plans for enhancing the growth of the economy, but some of these plans are undermined by the climate change and climate crisis. We will be looking to identify some of these issues, and also discuss how the government some policies we're using to adapt and mitigate some of the problems that we're identifying in the space. So I think I'll leave it for my co-panelists to make the opening remarks, and we'll take it from there.
So I was just going to say, don't tell them everything, just very brief opening remarks, and then we will move on quickly. So over to you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nkiru Chime. I'm the Managing Director for Infragora Advisory. It's a project development advisory firm that focuses on helping project developers to take their capital-intensive projects through the whole life cycle, from development to capital mobilization. I was most recently the acting managing director for the Infrastructure Bank. So today's topic, balancing economic growth with climate action, is all about ensuring that while we seek to meet our climate action goals, that we do not compromise economic growth as a result of the decisions of our climate action. So we're going to delve into that would happen to ensure that we don't compromise our economic growth as we chase climate goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, thank you. So we'll ask Ruth to just introduce herself and just give an opening remarks, and then we will just kick off.
Okay, thank you. I'm Ruth Surinadi. I'm the regional coordinator for Climate Parliament in charge of West Africa. I also oversee Uganda, co-lead in Uganda, and also a backup lead in Kenya. It's this topic, balancing economic growth and climate action. It's something that it's very important for us as a nation and as individuals at this time. It's not just a necessity. It is actually something that would help us build resilience and sustainability as individuals, as a nation, as a planet. So I know that we are going to gain so much value from this conversation, and I'm glad to be here and I'm glad to meet us all. Thank you.
Very much, Ruth, and we're happy to have you too. You know, sometimes I wonder if it's really, is it really attainable for us to, you know, balance economic growth and with the climate action? You know, can we actually grow? When you say economic growth, so you expect to see things like industrialization, you're moving. So are we able to do this, you know, and not do it at the expense of our environment, right? So these are very interesting. This is a very interesting dimension that we will be taking today. And I will start by talking about the climate adaptation and resilience for vulnerable communities, right? When we talk about climate adaptation, we want to talk about the effect of climate change, and you all agree with me that the effect of climate change is real. I don't know of everyone here, but in Abuja it's really hot, and you know these are all effects. And we for instance, by now we should have started seeing the rains. Farmers should have started preparing. These are all effects of climate change, and you know we've had NIME tell us that rains will come late, and farmers should prepare for late rains. And, you know, so if the rains are coming late and farmers will start planting late, you know, those are very serious effects that have to do even on our food security. So I will just go quickly to ask, Olumide, you know, I'd like to start with you because you're blessed amongst women, but also because you're speaking around the policy issues, and you know that creates an enabling environment, you know, and sets the tone for everything to work well. So I want to ask, right, what measures is the government taking to enhance climate adaptation and resilience, particularly for vulnerable communities facing the brunt of climate impact?
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. So vulnerable communities are at the top of the priorities of the government. As you know, the impacts of climate change, they're very visible and we're all aware of them. There's a lot of activity around policy coordination to make sure that organizations, institutions of government that are charged with implementation of plans of the government are coordinated. So the establishment of the Climate Change Council through the Act brings the force of law into implementation of climate action in Nigeria. Due to the fact that it's a cross-cutting issue, you have many ministries that have to work together, like the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Science and Technology, Water Resources, and the likes, and finance as well, to mobilize for the goals. So if you have those agencies and MDAs working in tandem, you have a situation where we're able to tackle the issues. Now, when we talk about actual implementation, for instance, you have areas of the country where They have been really ravaged by drought. The government has designed programs to provide water irrigation boreholes and reforestation programs for them, especially in the north and the arid north, as well to targeting energy poverty. As you know, the REA has been doing a lot of work to improve energy access in the country. We have at least 2 years ago, we've had the REA sign up and secure funding to expand on the off-grid electrification of rural areas up to 2 megawatts. And a lot of activity has been happening in this area to provide energy access to the bottom of the pyramid. Also, on the back of the M300 Energy Summit and the World Bank Energy Summit, we've also had quite a bit of activity galvanizing support for vulnerable communities around energy access as well. I think I'll just pass it on now because of the time.
It's okay. I won't drill further. I'll come back to you. I was going to say, well, it's nice to hear that their ministries are collaborating. We're looking at issues around energy poverty. Do we have, I'm very particular about food security, right? So do we have things that we're doing to help farmers, around climate smart varieties of food, like things early maturing varieties or stuff like that? Does government have any policy, or is there anything we're doing in that regards? We can come back to that later.
Okay.
But yeah.
Sure.
So it would be nice to hear your thoughts. I can catch up with you later on that.
Okay.
But it would be nice to hear your thoughts,
Okay.
on that. Let's go and ask Ruth what, how can Nigeria legal system better address the rights and needs of vulnerable communities affected by climate change, particularly in regions that are most impacted? Is there really climate justice?
Very good question, Salamatu. Thank you. So I would say on this question on how Nigeria can better address this issue, the first is we already have some legislations, that are targeted at addressing it. And I would say, okay, we have the Climate Change Act of 2021. But the thing about that act, yes, it's a progressive legislation with respect to climate action in Nigeria. But the thing about it is that it doesn't provide, it doesn't have provision for climate adaptation, which is really important if we are talking about helping vulnerable communities. So that act, while it is good, it needs to expand to have provision, targeted funding for climate adaptation for these vulnerable communities. That's one. Then secondly, we have, I'm going to first talk on the legislations first. We have the Land Use Act of 1978, which is honestly quite outdated, but it's not the subject of discussion for today. So the Land Use Act provides for the governor to allocate lands, but beyond the allocation, I'm looking at a situation where the act should be, revised to make provisions for land relocation and resettlement. So let's say people that were disposed of their land, or that's where they are living by reason of climate impact. So there should be an allocation for them, and it should be something that the governors should, that are in charge of land relocation and allocation, they should do something about it. There should be a provision also for that resettlement. And it's not just in the Land Use Act. It could also be part of the reforms for the Climate Change Act. We could have a provision for land resettlements as a result of climate change activities. Then the third thing, and last on this, I would say we need to have public interest litigation and corporate social responsibilities. Yes, I know it's already ongoing, but we need to have more environmental liability laws. So where companies, by reason of their action, have predisposed a community to climate change action negatives, they should bear liability for that. We've had something like that in, there was this case of Bemire and SPDC, that's Bemire and Shell in 2005. And it sets the tone for climate litigation in Nigeria. But then we still need more enforcement. It was as though after that case, we've not had so much of it. But I am of the opinion that in international parlance, you talk about the polluter pay principle. So even in Nigeria, we should have companies take responsibility. If we have more litigation against them for, climate action, for their activities that have caused adverse effects, maybe oil spillage and all that in communities, I think they would, this would help those communities. And of course, we have corporate social responsibility. They should, to an extent, take up the costs of the damages that they've caused to communities as a result of their activities. So
Thank you. We hear you, right? Companies or organizations should be more responsible, and if people know their rights. So my question will be, for a layman or for a community that has been affected, by the impact of climate change or by the action or for maybe some activities, some economic activities that is being carried out by an organization and they have been impacted. So what are they supposed to do, right? You have said, okay, there's litigation, but as a community, I'm just there. And what am I supposed to do, right? Where do I run to? Is there a framework? What are the steps that, we should take?
So as a community, remember there is already like I talked about that case. It's in law, we call it like a locus classicus. It has set the pace, it has set the tone for that. So where by reason of the action of a community, they have caused damage, action of a company, sorry, they have caused, damage to community, their lands and all that, there is room for public interest litigation, which is what I talked about. They could take it up in court, or, for most of these companies, there is room to write to them. Okay, so that is also available. You could have a representative from the community write to them about it, and they have by law a certain corporate social responsibility to the community. And these things are there, but most times people want to know if you know. So
how do I hold them responsible?
That's in holding them. You hold them responsible by actually holding them responsible.
So in my village,
right?
Where's my first point of call? Oh, these people have done this, and
that's why the community leaders need to mobilize. Okay. There should be. That's we are talking about in communities, and this is not something that you do in silos. There has to be a community mobilization, and then a spokesperson. It's of course appointed to speak for them on this issue. And then that's also where we have NGOs that are climate focused. This is it's not just in getting the grants, snapping the pictures in public and all that. This is engaging NGOs that are involved in this. The NGOs could be the voice for those communities. When you're talking about the ways they can go about it, that is one. And then also at the local government level, they have representatives. communicating with the representatives about it could help.
Okay, let me just ask the cameraman to zoom the lens very well so that all those communities that are waiting, Ruth is here, that are waiting for climate action litigation, please, Ruth is here. She will show you the way. Okay, so we'll move quickly to, thank you. I love money. We all love money. So I will ask you, in your view, right, what role can the finance sector play in enhancing climate adaptation and resilience for vulnerable communities, particularly in Africa? But let me just drive it down to Nigeria.
All right. So we know the whole climate action conversation centers around energy, so to speak, because energy is not just a key driver of economic growth. Energy powers almost everything. Energy powers the economy. Energy powers a lot of the SDGs. If you're talking about SDG 1 on poverty alleviation, right? You need energy to be able to even improve the quality of life for people. If you're talking about agriculture, as Ruth even mentioned, Salamatu mentioned at the beginning, when you're talking about mechanization, storage and all of that, you need energy to be able to ensure food security and all. Now, talking about how the financial sector can support in providing, in tackling this climate action, especially around the vulnerable communities, we need to be able to, first of all, design financial instruments that enable allocation of resources to maybe renewable energy to foster the climate action that we're talking about. So we need to look at things like sustainability linked loans. We need to look at things like green bonds, which also help to target these sort of investments in green or clean energy initiatives. We also need to look at how the financial sector can help, maybe from an insurance point of view, from a de-risking point of view, also help with specialized insurance policies that can help to make the risk investments and make them more investable and attractive to the private sector. The financial services sector can also allocate long-term capital to help drive investment in renewable energy investments or energy investments specifically are long-term in nature. And it's important that you have the patient capital that, comes in to be able to take it through the length of time that is required to realize those investments. We also need to think of how our pension industries can tap into this space. Pension and insurance, those are really the industries that have access to long-term capital. How do we enable those industries to also be able to play? And I typically say that investment for the private sector is usually a viability conversation, right? The private sector can only invest where the landscape is viable or the investment is viable. And really, infrastructure investments can actually be very valuable. It's all about ensuring that we have the right policies to ensure stability and also ensuring that there is de-risking. The government also has a role to play in de-risking, especially if you're talking about large-scale investment, large-scale investment, especially in energy. And I know that you've talked about the role of PPPs and all of that, and I'm sure maybe we can delve into that more.
We definitely will, right? And so I will be moving on quickly to the next discussion topics. I just wanted us to set the tone about, the effects of, climate change, the climate actions that were available, and, how communities, could move around it, and how we could mobilize, what instruments were available, what policies, government has put in place. So we will move to now policy. Like I said earlier, policies is what makes everything, well, policy is the starting point. Implementation is big, right? But policy is where you design all and you put that framework to make the action or implementation easier. So we'll be looking at how we will strengthen policies. We will strengthen policy integration for climate resilient economic growth. How do we ensure that policies are in place that will, as we push for economic growth, we will also ensure that we're not harming, the environment. So I will start with Ruth, and I will ask Ruth, right, as a lawyer, right, or from the legal perspective, how can Nigeria strengthen the integration of climate resilience into its economic policies, and what challenges do you foresee in this process? So how do we do it, and what challenges do you foresee that we will have in doing it?
Okay, thank you, Salamatu. So to answer this question, I would say the first thing is mainstreaming climate considerations. Now, the Climate Change Act in Section 19 actually provided that climate considerations be integrated in all national development plans. Now, it's one thing to have that, and another thing to implement that, just as you talked about. So I think the first port of call is saying that climate considerations are take front burner conversations and are integrated in all our national development plans. And on this, I would still add that we still need, though the Climate Change Act provided for that, there is need for sectorial guidelines, particularly for the energy sector, the infrastructure, and as well as the agricultural sector, because we don't really have sectorial guidelines for that. Then the next thing in this, I would say, it's now to strengthen our climate legislations to ensure that they align with international best practices and our international commitments. For example, the NDCs, okay, ensuring that our NDCs align with our commitments under the Paris Agreement. Then I would also say on this, I would also say for the NCCC that was set up under the Climate Change Act, there is need, now there's the National Council on Climate Change. It's a very important setup by the Climate Change Act, but there is need to empower empower the NCCC in its activities. There is need for more that's empowerment, and there is also need for interagency coordination. So the NCCC wouldn't stand on its own. There is need for interagency coordination with other organizations that are involved in the same thing. Remember, the goal is to see that we have eco-friendly economic growth, okay, as a nation. For the challenges that could come up with respect to this, the first one is, compliance. Just as you said, we have policies, but there is this issue of compliance, monitoring and enforcement. For example, we have the Environmental Impact Assessment Act, okay, which provides that major projects be evaluated for, that they should have climate impact assessment. But we see that a number of infrastructure projects and even some real estate projects that are done on property or area that are nature areas. You're wondering, wasn't this properly evaluated by the environment? We are seeing the effect on the environment. We are having more trees that are felled to give room for infrastructure projects and real estate projects. I don't want to talk about one that just happened last year. And you're like, was this thing properly evaluated? Was this thing properly assessed as to the environmental impact, the ecosystem that it's being destroyed as a result of this project, just because maybe it's profitable, but in the long run, we are killing our environment. Now we are complaining of the heat, we are complaining of the rays, all this. When you fell the trees, what do you expect? So we have this laws, but then compliance is really low. Compliance and enforcement. Then the second challenge that we are facing, it's funding. These things actually involve a lot of funding, and it's not just on something that should be left alone for government. We need to explore other funding areas, like maybe concessional loans, green bonds, and so on. Then the third challenge I would highlight with respect to this is, private sector reluctance. Most businesses see climate change policies as regulatory burdens instead of opportunities for investment. And sometimes you don't blame them, That's why we need to have more investment-friendly policies that would make them know that, okay, these policies are not burdens. Don't make it so stringent and bureaucratic, because it just makes them reluctant to even go into climate or green investments. So
I hear all this problem, but as a business, tell me why I will put the environment first instead of my pocket, right? So, but that's what we want to unravel here, right? So, as the conversations progress, let's hope that our panelists will be able to let businesses know why they should put the environment, or they should balance. I can't ask you to put the environment before your pocket, but there should be a balance. And I think balance is the word, here. So yes, we hear that compliance is a big issue. Compliance has always been a big issue, but how do we now improve this compliance? But we'll come back to brainstorm or to discuss a bit more on how, we can improve compliance, right? So I'll come back to you, Ruth, start thinking about how we can make it better. But I'll move quickly now to Nkiru. And I will ask, right, just what I was asking, right? How can Nigeria balance economic growth and its climate action commitment, particularly as it relates to the energy sector? We have our, our climate action commitment. So maybe you should remind us, right?
Yeah.
And then you tell us how we want to balance it. How can we balance it, right? Is it really possible?
Right, great. And I like that some people would have to tell us why we need to put the environment first before before our pocket, but it's a tough conversation. But really, it's all about creating the balance. Most times when people talk about the climate action, the main thing you hear is, oh, we need to do renewables, we need to do green investments and all of that. But from an investment perspective and from an economic perspective, you need to create that balance to ensure that while you're pursuing the climate actions, you are not jeopardizing the economic growth.
Mm-hmm.
And energy is critical, like I said. So while if we want to have this conversation from an energy perspective, while we prioritize renewable energy, we need to first of all remember that one, fossil is the main source of revenue for Nigeria. How do we tap into our fossil reserves or fossil wealth, right? To be able to, first of all, we need to accelerate the development of or the extraction of those resources so that we can use the resources from it to develop the renewable energy. I tell people sometimes maybe it's a blessing, so to speak, that Nigeria has the sort of infrastructure gap that it has, because we are not thinking, or when you talk about energy, our energy infrastructure is very poor. We're developing new ones from scratch. So we have that opportunity while we're developing to develop something that is more sustainable. So we probably need to be thinking about extracting our oil and gas quickly, using the resources to develop the renewable energy space. That's one. Then secondly is that we don't need to look at it from a case of we need to abandon the use of the fossil. It still has a place, especially gas. Gas is a transition fuel and is relatively cleaner than the renewable. How do we use gas for industrialization, for example? How do we use gas to power our industries? How do we use gas to develop large-scale energy? Because even when you talk about the renewable, you still need to have the power to be able to, power those renewable. If you're talking about maybe deploying electric vehicles and all of that, you need power to be able to charge those vehicles and all. So we probably need to be thinking of, from a balancing point of view, deploying the renewables for the last mile, right? While we are using gas to create energy from an industrialization point of view, right? Now we need to also know that these things that we're talking about requires a whole lot of money. And there is, I believe that there is money to make the investment, but Nigeria is not attracting the investment because we don't have the policies that are investment friendly, one. And secondly, we don't really know how to structure the projects to de-risk them properly. So to be able to do large scale energy projects, that de-risking is important, and is almost impractical to do that de-risking without the government. If you look at the large scale energy projects that have succeeded, they were largely IPP. If you look at Zungeru, it was done by the government, and then government concessioned it under a PPP kind of arrangement. So in that instance, the private sector that is coming in is buying an asset that is already de-risked, and it already knows, the revenue streams and everything that can give confidence to investors to bring in the money. If you look at the Edo Azure transaction, the government provided guarantees that enable the partial risk guarantees. That was key to making that happen. Secondly is the PPA that was very, so it's important that we have policies that enable, the structuring and the risking of investments to be able to bring in the private capital to develop the sector. And then most importantly is we understanding that it's a balancing act. Nobody is saying chase renewable at the expense of every other thing. But even as we move forward, there is a place for gas and there is a place for all other energy mix. We need to create that balance. And we need to, most importantly, ensure that investments are structured in a way that enables private sector to come in.
So thank you very much. We hear you. We have to create a balance. We need to de-risk. The government needs to do a lot of de-risking to help investment flow in. We need to just balance. I think that's a summary of what you have said. I will move, if you're online and you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I will move quickly to ask Mr. Olumide, how government is strengthening policies, policy integration across various sectors to drive climate resilient economic growth. What is government really doing? Let's put it in terms of policy.
Okay.
Right.
So I think the first thing to note is that Nigeria, in fact, Africa as a continent, and Nigeria in this case, is not as responsible for the historical emissions that have happened that are actually causing the global issue. So this puts to the fore the idea of a just energy transition, which is something that we actually underpin a lot of our policies by. What government is doing, again, I think a very important policy that Ruth has spoken to is the National Climate Change Act, which brought about the establishment of the National Climate Change Council. Like I'd said before, the idea is to have a coordination mechanism for policy that looks holistically at climate change action, climate action, and aligns it with sectoral plans and national development policies. The act in itself, I think it's almost omnibus bill that allows for both federal government policy coordination and also subnational engagement and all the way to local governments. The membership of the council itself allows for this sort of seamless interaction between these arms of government and also with the states. Now, another thing to mention as well is the Energy Transition Plan, which underpins our energy transition in Nigeria. It sets a pathway towards 2060 for us to be able to transition from fossil fuels to renewables and alternative forms of fuel. This policy also recognizes gas as a transition fuel and allows us to be able to understand that the business as usual trajectory of Nigeria will not lead to a net zero economy by 2060. Then, of course, again, like I said before, there's a need to balance the energy transition with lives and livelihoods, because as a government, we have an economic imperative to make sure that our people are not the food security objectives of the country and sustenance of people, especially the vulnerable groups, are not undermined or compromised. Because of that, the energy transition plan as well has been revised to also include sectors that like transport and agriculture, so that we're looking at these very closely and making sure that while we're transitioning, we're looking at sectors that actually speak to food security, for instance, and transport as well, which has a pass-through and leads to poverty if it is not carefully, if the transition is not carefully managed. Another policy of government in this regard is the presidential CNG initiative, which seeks to mainstream gas as a fuel because of its for transportation, because of its practicality in terms of it's domestically produced. It reduces pressure on foreign exchange, and the infrastructure for it realistically can be expanded to cater to the country while looking at other forms of energy as well to address this energy poverty issue. Another thing that I would like to add is around cooking. This is another cross-cutting issue. The clean cooking issue is something that is a low-hanging fruit, to say the least, and is one way to balance the energy transition with livelihoods, because cooking happens in every home in Nigeria, but the fuels that we use are actually undermining several things, like, for instance, our naturally abundant forest cover and the tree cover. A lot of homes, up to 80% of homes in Nigeria, are reliant on wood fuels. We already have a policy on clean cooking, which was produced by the Ministry of Environment in 2022 or so, but we do not have an implementation plan. So to strengthen implementation around this, being able to deploy technologies that take care of households, especially vulnerable households and women in particular, because these are the people that mostly are affected by the cooking, and children as well. The core benefits of that is that we're able to address the energy poverty and also create viability for businesses that are dependent on this. And like Nkiru said, you do have to finance this transition. For instance, Nigeria's energy transition will require about the shortfall years about $15 million just to achieve the targets, to be on that trajectory to reach that net zero objective by 2060. So in doing so, we have to figure out innovative ways to finance some of these projects. You will also have to figure out ways to improve affordability of some of these technologies. So one of the ways we're looking at it is to develop an implementation framework that takes account of some of the technologies that can be domesticated in Nigeria to reduce the pressure on both foreign exchange and create jobs by building capacity in young people to be able to develop some of these, say, for instance, clean cook stoves in the country. Again, speaking to the idea of how we can finance the transition, there are several ways to go about this. One of the things we've done successfully is to float green bonds, for instance, to domestically raise capital to be able to finance priority areas such as reforestation and energy access. Another area that we're looking at, which looks very promising in the future as well, is the carbon markets. So we have, as a government, released the carbon market activation mechanism. At least the regulation is out. And even though there's quite a bit of a process to achieve this market, the activation of this market, the point is it allows us to be able to raise capital from investors who are looking to take advantage of the carbon assets in Nigeria, and this is also a source of foreign exchange to fund the transition. I think with the carbon markets as well, it also gives us an opportunity to reduce deforestation in Nigeria. So the core benefit of some of these is that we do preserve our forest and biodiversity, and then we're also able to balance the transition with livelihoods, because a lot of dependencies are in these forests.
Yeah.
And okay, so
let me let you catch your breath, right? Let me let you catch your breath. But yes, it's nice to know that we have these policies in place. I'll come back to carbon market. That's a very interesting. That's a very interesting point that you just touched. So we'll come back, to discuss that, right? We will move now to promoting green growth and low carbon development. When we talk about, green growth development, we're looking at, promotion of sustainable economic growth, and while we're ensuring that we're reducing greenhouse gases. So we're looking at things like EV, renewable energy, just basically the natural ecosystem, right? So I would have come back to you, because I think I should go back to Olumide, because you had touched on technology. My next question to you was going to be around technology, and while you were trying to explain the previous question, you had talked about technologies, the technologies that were available, right? So I know these technologies are available, and you have spoken about a few of them. Right? But my next question to you will be, what role exactly, right, does technology play in the government's initiative to promote green growth and advance low carbon development in Nigeria? So you talked about the technologies that are there, we've heard. So, but what role is it playing?
Okay, thank you. That's a very good question, Salmatu. I think technology is the cornerstone of the achieving the goals of the transition. The reason being, even when you have a secured finance, half the time what you realize is that you do need practical solutions to problems that you face in Nigeria. A good example, for instance, is with methane, GHG emissions with methane. Technology is crucial for being able to detect the sources of this methane emissions. We were able to secure a partnership at the last COP to about $100 million to support satellite imaging to be able to identify the sources of methane emissions in Nigeria. And this is technology at work. I like to talk about clean cooking because it's, it's sort of closer to the grassroots and, livelihoods. With clean cooking, for instance, the typical 3-stone fire that everybody likes to enjoy their jollof rice from because of the smoky flavor and all of that. Now, a very simple
Firewood. Let me
sorry?
help you. Firewood.
Firewood, yeah, exactly. Firewood, yes. There's a lot of dependency on those. Like I said, 80% of Nigerians rely on the 3-stone firewood cooking method. But just with a little bit of adaptation of this technology or of this method of doing things, you're able to create an improved cook stove that is far more efficient, and it's using a lot less of the firewood and the biomass that is required to power them. So also, I have to say that we've made quite a bit of progress around alternatives to the regular fuels that we use. Like for instance, in hydrogen, we've been able to secure a facility and a PPP that allows the production of hydrogen fuel, making Nigeria, positioning Nigeria as a regional hub in Ogun State, for instance. So we're positioning Nigeria as a regional hub in the West Africa for the production of biofuels, alternative fuels. I think in the long run, getting our energy transition to accelerating our climate action in Nigeria also rely on data, and with a lot of data, and with AI now, early warning systems, for instance, they require quite a lot of computational power to be able to predict this weather accurately. Of course, that has implications for food security if we're not able to. So NIMET and the rest of the agencies that require to predict both flood and drought and weather patterns will be relying a lot on advanced technologies to be able to do this in an effective way to help farmers predict the weather.
Yeah, so that's interesting to know that. Of course, we all know that technology, almost everything is driven on technology, right? And technology is evolving, and it's nice to know that yes, it is the bedrock of most of the things that the government is doing. I just am wondering, right, if we have any policies or any activities that is helping technology innovation within the space. Are we doing anything to promote it? It's just something for us to think about. If there is, it would be nice to share. Otherwise, that's a thought that we should hold. Yes, these technologies are there, they're helping. Are we doing anything for homegrown technologies? Do we have any technology incubation that is cooking somewhere? Just for our thoughts, right?
Yeah.
If there is something, it's nice to share. Otherwise, we will just quickly.
There's quite a bit going on in that space. I think I would like to speak to for instance, the AI Academy that is looking to empower young people to get to become more abreast with what's happening in the space, just to be able to use these new technologies to solve problems in Nigeria. And we are also establishing regional hubs that will look at domestic problems and identify innovators to solve some of these problems. Again, like I say, cooking is one of those challenges. Around energy access, being able to domesticate technology and produce things like solar panels that will typically import. We have areas in Nigeria that are very rich in silica. So we insist at the UN, the National Council on Climate Change, when we go to the COPs, for instance, the insistence on technology transfer, which is one of the pillars of the UNFCCC, is something that we're strengthening. How do we improve negotiating capacity? So there's a lot of capacity building going on in that space as well, to make sure that technology transfer actually becomes a reality, not just something that we go back every year to discuss.
Yeah, okay, that's good. That's really very interesting. We should really let you catch your breath, so I'll give you some time to rest.
All right.
And I will move quickly to Ruth to ask, what legal frameworks are in place to support Nigeria's transition to green, low carbon economy, and how effective are they in driving compliance? So I think I should break this question into two, right? What legal frameworks are in place to support Nigeria's transition to green, low carbon economy?
Okay, thank you, Salamatu. So the first and very obvious one, it's the Climate Change Act of 2021. We cannot be talking about climate action without mentioning the Climate Change Act. So some salient provisions of the Climate Change Act that are very relevant to this question is that, so the Climate Change Act provided for, carbon markets. It's also provided for the NCCC that we know about, and it's also provided for emissions regulations. Okay, so it's emission regulation targets. But the thing about that, the emission targets, is that there is also no room for, there was no provision for enforcement. So it's there, but we don't really have enforcement provisions for those targets. So it's making that aspect of the Climate Change Act a gentleman's agreement. Without enforceability, it is, I won't say it is useful, but what distinguishes law from morals is that's penalty for non-compliance. So when there is no penalty for non-compliance, it's as good as almost non-existent. So that's one legislation. And another legislation that's very relevant to your question, it's the Environmental Impact Assessment Act. Of course, the Environmental Impact Assessment Act provides for, risk assessment, climate risk assessment of major projects. So that it's there. And we also have the Electricity Act of 2023. Now, that's a very forward-thinking legislation in Nigeria, I must comment. And why it is very relevant to this conversation is that it decentralized energy generation, distribution for renewable energy projects. And we have up to 10 states now that have set up regulations for their own electricity markets. And it's beautiful, as it's no more with the Electricity Act now, the subnational government, that's the state government, have room to expand their electricity distribution using renewable energy. And a lot of them are already on it. We now have things like mini grids, that are enabled by solar and other renewable energy resources. Another legislation that is relevant to your question, it's the National Renewable Energy Efficiency Policy. That's also that aims to achieve 30% of energy mix, of renewable energy in Nigeria's energy mix by 2030. Okay, that's an ambitious target, and we are looking to see that happen. And already, some structures are already being set up for its implementation. And one more law I will talk about is the Petroleum Act. Okay, at least the Petroleum Act made provision for, regulatory provision for companies that are involved in oil and gas production. And it also stipulates that they have a dedicated funding for as support to the communities where they are placed. So I think this five would
It's
answer your
yeah,
question.
we have it's quite a basket. It's quite a basket. So, but compliance is still an issue, right? And so, why is compliance still an issue, and how can we, get, or how can we facilitate, that angle that is still an issue for us? Why is compliance still an issue? Maybe if we know why, we will be able to say, this is how we can solve it. Why do you think compliance is still an issue?
Okay, why I would say compliance is an issue. It's, for example, in the Climate Change Act, that doesn't make any provision for adaptation funding. Okay, so if we're expecting compliance, like my co-panelists have said, Nkiri talked about it, Olamide talked about it, funding is very important. So when you don't have any provision, that's carved out specialized provision for adaptation mechanism, it makes the compliance weak. Okay, so that's one. And then the next thing, the next challenge with compliance I would highlight is it's as though there is a bit of fragmentation amongst the institution. For example, we have the NCCC, we have the Ministry of Power, we also have the Energy Commission of Nigeria, and they have, amongst the three of them now, they have overlapping functions. And sometimes these overlapping functions slow down implementation because this one is waiting for this one to do this, one's waiting for this one to do this. So I think that it's need for interagency collaboration, and then clear stipulation of the functions of each, because they are very related, they are very interconnected. So I think there is need to, clearly state what this one does. And then there is now, apart from stating that, seeing that these agencies work in collaborations and not in silos.
People, they work together. But I'll come back to you, Olumide, now, and I will ask, do you agree that there's need for more, let me not say there's none, for more interagency collaboration, and how, is government trying to drive this or make this better?
So, yeah, thank you for that question. I totally agree with Ruth. I think that when you have those overlaps, what happens is that you tend to have a situation where there's sometimes conflict or just inefficiencies in implementation. What I've seen recently done is a repository, a public-facing repository. It's been developed to sort of itemize or collate what the functions of agencies are that are climate related, and sort of recognize or identify where the overlaps and the gaps are, and then take that back to try to understand. It's a bit of a, I think, lengthy process, as my legal-minded co-panelists will know. Many of these agencies are actually established by law, so you have to look at the Establishing Act and sort of review them. The Climate Change Act itself is actually undergoing some sort of review. So I like that this has been highlighted as well around the adaptation component of funding adaptation. I think this might have been an anomaly that happened during some of the negotiations prior to the time, because adaptation wasn't associated with the Global South as much as mitigation was. So at the time, it just was a question of necessity. It had to be done that way. But there's a provision in the Act, the Climate Change Fund, that allows for some kind of funding mechanism which can sort of be tailored to addressing some issues and sometimes adaptation. I also wanted to provide a bit more information on how we can harness some or secure some more funding around for climate action. We have a golden opportunity now because we have just had, I think the Development Bank of Nigeria has just been accredited as a GEF, Global Environment Fund a bank. So that means that now we have access, more accelerated access to climate finance. So these are some of the things I think that will help us with moving forward in the climate action space.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I don't think I've been fair to you today, but it's okay.
No problem. I like
It's
answering
okay.
questions.
It's okay. So I will move quickly to Nkiru. I know that you had answered part of this question previously, and I was going to ask what financing and investment strategies can be deployed to ensure financial sustainability. So you had talked about some of the mechanisms, right, and strategies. However, here the key word is sustainability. How can we do this in a sustainable manner?
All right. So again, we need to understand that from an investment point of view, sustainability has to do with viability of the solution that we're deploying. So how do we, it's all about structuring the investments correctly and also de-risking the investments properly to ensure that private sector can come in. If you even talk about climate finance, for example, those funds are not going to come in if the investments are not well structured, because you have everyone, you have all the countries competing for the same funds. So anybody who is deploying funding wants to be sure that the funding can come back. So how do we structure investments in Nigeria to ensure that those investments are viable and that providers of capital can get their money back? Government needs to do a lot more in the area of PPP, right, to de-risk the transactions. Government needs to also consider for critical infrastructure projects, also ensure providing guarantees, right? The CBN also needs to support with ensuring that foreign currency risks are well hedged, maybe providing access to swap facilities and all, because we know that most of these monies that we are looking for are not in Nigeria. You get the monies from outside the country, but especially as it relates to energy revenue is in Naira. You don't really have any way of structuring an energy project to generate FX. So how do you hedge the instruments that you have brought in to finance the transaction? Government needs to also do a lot more in the area of, we've talked about it, the carbon, enabling the carbon market, because when you enable the carbon market, that provides another stream of revenue for making the investments more sustainable, more viable. Government also needs to be thinking about, subsidy is not in its own a bad thing, but then it's important that subsidies are used as a way of de-risking the transactions to make them commercially viable. So how do we deploy subsidies correctly and in the right way? If you look at, for instance, what the REA is doing, that's a typical example, because it's providing some sort of subsidized funding or some sort of grants right, to enable the deployment of renewable energy, especially in the underserved areas and in those areas where it is more difficult for people to afford to pay the commercial value of these things. So we need to think of how to do more of these things to be able to drive more investments
Okay.
into the sector.
Thank you very much. So if we hear you correctly, we need to de-risk. It needs to be, we need to de-risk. It needs to, there needs to be value for investments to take place, right? And I rightfully agree, right? So we will move quickly to the fourth session or pillar of today's discussion, and it is all about mobilizing climate finance and fostering public-private partnerships. It's as if Nkiru is into the future. And, just before she finishes, she moves me, to the very next topic or to the very next area that we're looking to discuss, right? And the question here will be, can the public-private sector partnership, can it work, right, in this space? And I will move right to Ruth, right? We like Laura. Let's hear what policies should governments, right, implement to mobilize climate finance and facilitate public-private partnerships to accelerate climate action in Nigeria, right? I think we can start with Ruth. Is PPP possible in that space? And what government, what policies should government implement to mobilize finance for this, PPPs and PPPs to take place? Yeah.
Thank you. Nkiru talked about first of all, it's possible. That's the first thing. And, Nkiru and Olamide they have mentioned green bonds, tax incentives and green bonds. I think that's what I'll start with first. Olamide highlighted something, the fact that now we have the Development Bank of Nigeria as the first DFI that is accredited with Green Climate Fund, and is a game changer for us as a nation with respect to attracting global climate finance. Nigeria in 2017 was the first African country to attract sovereign green bonds, and we're able to get, as at 2017, 10.69 billion naira funding for renewable energy projects through that. And then in 2019, we were also able to raise 15 billion naira also in renewable energy project. Now that we have the Development Bank of Nigeria accredited with the GCF, we could expand that. We could expand that and, attract more financing for green projects. And I will add here, the Development Bank of Nigeria could also partner with commercial banks and pension funds to issue thematic green bonds for specific projects in maybe renewable energy, low carbon infrastructure, or even the carbon markets. This could be this could help us in attracting in increasing climate finance in this area. And they also talked about, blended finance, and it's very important. It's also another way. Concessional loans, we cannot continue depending only on the government. We need to, in COP27, the carbon markets, the African Carbon Market Initiative was set up. No, COP27, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the African Carbon Market Initiative was set up. And this is an opportunity for us to have our domestic carbon markets. If we have, if we plan this as a nation well, we could raise climate finance through carbon taxes, and even emission trading systems, to fund adaptation projects. So I would also talk about green energy zones. This is another initiative that could attract global climate finance to us. What are green energy zones? Green energy zones, I would say they are designated areas where policies and conditions are optimized to attract green investments in renewable energy or even green technologies. And these green energy zones would help a lot in sustainable industrialization. Apart from positioning us as a country for global climate finance, it also creates jobs locally, as well as help us as a nation to build resilience against energy price volatility. Now, this Green Energy Zones project, it's dear to my heart because it is being promoted by my organization, Climate Parliament, in collaboration with United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO. And the project is tagged Parliamentarians for Climate Finance. So we are working with legislators to see that policies, because they have a role to play in this. My co-panelists have talked about, when the policies are not investor friendly, no private investor will put his or her head or his or her money in something that it's going to sink. So if we, through this Parliamentarians for Climate Finance project, working with legislators, we want to see that they create policies that would make, that would take out a lot of bureaucracies with respect to green climate finance investments. And then it is something that is replicable. It's something that once these green energy zones, when we have more of it, it's something that would, when we are talking about positioning Nigeria for global climate finance, just as Nkuru said, sometimes it's not that we it is relying on renewable energy. It's integrating about 250 solar megawatts per, to run it. And it's something that I'm hoping that it would demonstrate that targeted climate finance and, policy reforms can lead to eco-friendly economic growth, one, and at the same time, showing that Nigeria is staying true to her commitments towards low carbon development. Okay, so this project that is being promoted by Climate Parliament in collaboration with UNIDO for green energy zones is actually something that would be a game changer once all the parties involved really buy into it. And lastly on this, I would say capacity building for legislators. Our legislators need to have the expertise, need to get technical expertise on, infrastructure. They need that technical expertise on climate finance terms, such as green bonds, green bonds, climate adaptation funding. Now, I know that they would not be able to make policies without the right knowledge. You can only make policies
If you know.
about something that you're aware of.
Yeah.
And that is why also Climate Parliament, it's still part of our project to, under this Parliamentarians for Climate Finance project, we are in collaboration with UNIDO, creating part of our taxes to create policy toolkits for these legislators that would contain policy briefs about, best practices, about country energy profile. Okay, and this would help them have working tools to make policies that would attract green investment. And also, I would also suggest that in the National Assembly, we have a climate advisory unit to advise, the legislators on best practices that would help in adaptation financing.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that Olamide has taken notes. We all have taken notes, and Blessing will also send you a bill for the marketing that you did. she will send you a small bill. But yes, very interesting. There's a lot that we can do. Yeah, the green zones. That's good, right? For me, every businessman wants value. If we have the right policies, capacity building, we can't be short on capacity building. I think capacity building across board, not just the legislators, everyone needs capacity building for us, to get to our goal. Everyone needs to be informed and needs to know what to do and how to do it, right? So I have just 2 more questions left. And should I say, fortunately, unfortunately, we have touched it in the course of our discussions, right? And so I do not want to, repeat the same things, right? I think that we have already spoken about how the private sector and government can collaborate and, the types of funds that are available. Like I said, this panelist is as if they know. So just as they're talking, they just move me, to the next point. So at this point, without repeating, right, no one likes to hear the same thing over and over again. I would like to throw the floor open to the audience for questions, and even those online can put forward their questions, right? So if we have a mic or someone to help, if you have any questions, I think this is the time to engage our panelists. Yeah, thank you. I see one hand there. Blessing, can you help? You can go ahead. Audience are asking questions, please. I see a question online. Someone online has asked a question. They will come to you. The mic is coming, but before we get to you, let me read out the question from a participant online. And I think he said that, well, I don't know if this is a question, but I will throw it open. He says that we offer unique technology to produce PV models specifically developed for Africa. Africa is looking to develop for itself. Whom can we contact to discuss the possibilities in Nigeria?
Should I?
Go ahead,
I'll
yeah.
go ahead.
Yes, you can go ahead. Dr. Messer, you can now get your answer from Olumide.
Okay, so there are many ways to answer that question. I could either give email addresses or give a list of names. But I think one way to really answer that question is to say there are many agencies, ministries, and departments that are tasked with technology development in Nigeria. I think I'll center that on the Ministry of Innovation, Science, and Technology. There are quite a few agencies under that ministry and departments that are doing very interesting things. One of them is the Raw Materials Research Council. They are developing a lot of technologies and very specific to Nigeria's use case in particular. For instance, things like creating briquettes for cooking out of rice husks. something that's very unique to Nigeria, and various other technologies that speak to the Nigerian context. Another one will be the National Bureau of Technology Incubation. There's a lot of
So he's saying that they already have this, they produce, I think
Right.
they're manufacturers, so they produce PV, solar PVs, and they're looking to enter the Nigerian market. I think
Right.
that's if he's online and can still hear me, I think that's what he's simply, asking. He's looking to enter the Nigerian market, and where is his first point of call?
Okay, that's easy. I think the Nigeria, the NIPC will
Okay.
be one place to go to understand what is possible in the Nigerian landscape. They can show you what the incentives are and how you can ground your business and establish your business in Nigeria. Of course, I will take that person's contact.
Yeah, so if you can hear us, if you drop your email address, Mr. Olamide will pick it up and we'll be in touch with you. I think it's an easy way to start. Right? So we will move quickly. I think I saw your hands up. We have a few questions here, so okay. So let's there's a gentle lady here, right?
Okay, my name is Paul, and I think the moderator has been a bit unfair to Ruth. Yes, you've been asking her the one biggest problem we have in Nigeria, which is implementation. You've asked her several times, we have all these amazing laws, how do we implement them, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure she doesn't have the solution to that.
Of course she doesn't. We all came here to look for the solutions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought that this is where citizenship diplomacy comes into play, especially because she touched on it on the last part of her, where she was talking to us. When we look at who we elect to be our leaders, we have to be very conscious about it. And we cannot be conscious about it if we do not have people who are educated, right? So it therefore means that we are on a loop, right? Because we have a vast majority of Nigerians who are not educated enough to make decisions. And people who get into the places where policies are made, regulations are made, legislations are made, are not educated enough to speak on these issues. Therefore, it means that we will not be able to solve these issues in any time soon, except citizens become active enough to ask people who are vying for positions, what do you think about this? And what do you think about this? And we cannot ask these questions if we ourselves do not know these questions. So it therefore means that we have a huge party to play. Because if you look at it, when last the Senate Committee on, for example, environment, call a big company to ask them, you spilled this amount of gas, right? What are you doing about it? When last did that happen? There is no accountability. So if there's no accountability for the companies, and if you look at the laws that we have, that she mentioned some, the penalties are quite meager for multinationals, right? Yeah. So my question is, if we look at the topic for today, which is balancing economic growth and climate action, can we really achieve economic growth through renewable energy, especially because Nigeria is a developing economy, and we know that we have problems around scalability because we do not have funding for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I would just
Ruth, they say I've not been fair to you. You are the one who asked her now. So it's okay. Yes, you can go ahead.
The thing is, as you are talking, you somewhat answered your question. Yeah, but I would just say that yes, it is possible, but then if there has to be that just transition. We cannot try to do it at the scale of much more developed countries. We have to do it at our pace. For now, okay, for example, okay, let me not use that example. We have to do it at our pace. We have the resources. When I talked about the green energy zones, it's localized. First of all, we just have to start small. And that's why when I was talking earlier, I applauded the Electricity Act that decentralized that electricity generation and had, made provision for mini grids and also made provision for private investments in this. As in, that's the part of making provision for private investors in electricity generation, distribution, and transmission. It's a good thing. So we just have to start at our pace. We have the resources. Now, there are areas where if you check the mapping of Nigeria, and let me say thematic areas, there's some areas more like in the north that have a lot of solar energy generation. I recently published an article with my colleague about this, where we talked about something like the north that has more solar, that they have more radiation. Solar energy can be harnessed there. There are some areas where it is, hydro. There's some area where it's wind. There's some that would be a collaboration. So the thing is to start small and scale it up. But if we are waiting for when we have all the resources, we are going to wait forever. We are not going to do anything. But any progress is better than none at all. So for the Electricity Act, for example, I actually saw an ambitious that in the Governors Forum, they actually made an ambitious plan to, to have all states have their electricity markets by May. I don't know how feasible that is, but I must applaud those that have taken the initiative. And I believe that the 10 states that have already taken the initiative, if they can at this time, have start small. First of all, have little, as in that's targets that they could meet. Targets as little as maybe maximizing the renewable energy resources that are available to them. It could be, that's biomass from agriculture, produce and all. It could be solar, it could be wind, depending on the area. But I think that the main thing is to start with the resources that we have. And the funding would come. When we are talking about, if you're presenting something, now we have the DBN that is accredited with GCF that could help us attract funding, but then there has to be bankable projects. And this funders would want to see
Go ahead.
My name is Francis Ojalaton. Now, undoubtedly, majority of us came here with the mindset of listening to insights on economic growth and climate action. I want to start by commending the effort of Salamatu and the other panelists. It has been a battle of intelligence as different aspects of topics, foremost among them the discussion on sustainability loans, creating jobs by building capacity as raised by Mr. Olamide, and then the importance of promoting technology, we also raised that. And I think those are the major concerns. Now, there's a problem here. And the point is, with due consideration to the fact that Nigerians no longer believe in the power of information. I mean, now we rely on rumors everywhere. We don't actually know what is true and what is not. So now my major question is, what other route, other measures can we take, the government, the private sectors, to ensure that we promote technology in the country? Now, a program was organized recently in the National Stadium. We call it a Unity Robot. It was organized by a private firm to promote technology. Now, we have schools in Abuja here. They strictly inculcate skills in students on how to build robots, code, do other things, incline with STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. But surprisingly, government support is no longer there, as the case may be. So what other measures can we take from the government point of view, from the private, to get to the average Nigerians? So that is my question, basically.
Okay, thank you. Does any of our panelists want to take this?
Sure, I can say one thing for sure. That's a very good question, and I think you've identified a very critical issue, which is how do we mainstream and how do we encourage young people to adopt technology as a way of life and as a way of solving problems in Nigeria. I think this is something that comes down to communication, how are we reaching people at the level with advocacy and sensitization? It's something that government will need to look at. And I even think as a beneficiary as well, the private sector and everybody, all the key stakeholders will need to take as a priority, because at the end of the day, the future of the country really relies on how skilled and how capable our young people are. So I would say that we have a renewed national orientation agency that is possibly, with a little bit of tweaking, could start to see to reaching people at this level. I know that everybody's digital now, and we have social media, and this is the medium where you can easily get people's attention. So some work needs to be done around that. I admit that, yes, it needs to be a bit more engagement at that level for young people. Again, curriculums in schools, it's a good thing that you highlighted that that's happening. There needs to be a lot more of that, looking to scale up engagement with young people and increasing the amount of STEM students that engage in STEM and research and education. These are some of the, should I say, reforms that need to happen. Again, for me, this is feedback. And I think that's something we'll be looking at and trying to have conversations around in the coming months with some of the leadership in the country, because the future really rests on how much capacity we can build in the youth. I think I'll leave it there at this point.
Yeah, thank you. Does that answer your question? Okay, that's good. So we can move quickly to the next one.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Basayo. I work with Nextyear. So first of all, I want to say thank you to Paul for giving context and background to my questions. So let me just start with making a comment. I think one of the problems we have in Nigeria compliance is poor enforcement. So we have a lot of ministries that would have subcommittees, like we have NESRA now, we have NCCC, same from Ministry of Environment, right? And there's so many policies, acts, yada, yada, yada. And now, to enforce what you've said is a problem. And this goes back to the government, right? So things as simple as placing transmission lines, you put them in residential areas, and now there's like a duplex close to it. That's already like an environmental hazard. So we don't even take our own self seriously. If the government don't take, I'm very sorry, if they don't take their own laws seriously, how do you expect like the layman and people at the grassroots level to take what you say seriously. So there's that. So now to my questions. Relating to the topic that speaks on balancing economic growth and climate action in Nigeria, I don't hear a lot of integrating people at the grassroots level. So I think it's very easy, most of the time, those of us that live in the urban areas, I think it's very easy for us to just assume their condition based on what we think and what we, so at Next Year, we do a lot of research, we do a lot of stakeholder engagement, and sometimes we have to travel to these locations. So what we are documenting is sometimes different from their reality. So there's that. For instance, now we extract constantly from the Niger Delta region, and when we are talking about development, it's easy for us to say, oh, let's do it in Lagos, let's do it in Abuja. Now, the people we are taking from, what about them? And if you're talking about economic growth and balancing economic growth, we need to also consider them. So there's so many, I think the closest thing when relating to people at the grassroots level, we say clean cooking because we assume they all use firewood. There's an affordability issue. They can't use gas, etc. But then I feel there's a way that these developments can spread to them. For instance, you're talking about technology adaptation, AI committee or something. I can't remember what you exactly said, forgive me. But there's a way that it could spread to them, and sensitization grows, capacity development grows. So I'm asking now, even carbon market, whenever I'm reading about carbon market in Nigeria, it's all about the ITMOs. Yeah, the internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. It's talking about how those overseas can come and offset their own carbon emission. But we can actually do this here. I think the carbon market is one of the most inclusive way of making money for those, even those at the grassroots level. So how do we integrate people at the grassroots level? From our stakeholder engagement, people complain that the people at the grassroots level, even leaderships, and we forget the position of these people. For instance, religious leaders now. Religion is a very big influence in Nigeria. We're not even joking about that. Community leaders, etc. So how do we integrate these people into our own processes of thinking, maybe through capacity building or otherwise? How do we sensitize them to actually see that they have a big role to play and the economic balance can cover everyone? I know countries like China, countries like UK, they're talking to us in Africa, where we're emitting about 4% of emissions. See, we're not emitting that much, and you say, oh my God, you guys have to like deal with yourself. If not, climate change is coming, it's going to destroy you, yada yada yada. I mean, it's nice and it's cute that you're worried about us, but then you're consistently burning coal, and later you come to a point and say, oh my God, let's help you guys. So fine, help us, but like when helping us, we need to also consider those at the grassroots level. So summarily, my question is, how do we bring those at the grassroots level into this development, into these plans? How do we ensure this economic growth circulates the 36 states in Nigeria, the 774 communities in the local government in Nigeria? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll just say before, I know my co-panelists would have something else to say. I think the first thing, I would use what you just talked about, that stakeholder engagement. And in local communities, we find that religious leaders, I think when the Climate Change Act in Section 19 talked about mainstreaming climate considerations in national development plans, I think it's even beyond national development plans. At the grassroots, conversations with religious leaders, we actually need to bring them to the table when we are talking about, you can't be talking about how to help a community that has been affected by climate change, and then you don't involve the leaders of the community. You can only be an outsider looking in. Your experience and your understanding of the peculiarity of that community and their needs would definitely be limited as an outsider. So I think the first thing is in stakeholder conversations, let there be representation, proper representation. And then after that, there is, sometimes even when we have the stakeholder conversations, there is no monitoring and evaluation of action plans. So we've made action plans. Sometimes adaptation funds are even issued, sometimes, but then we don't really monitor how it is managed or used. So I think the next thing that we really need to look into is, apart from enforcement, even in the enforcement, there is still need for proper monitoring and evaluation of whatever policies, whatever decisions that it needs to be followed up. It needs to be as in that's the reporting has to be periodic. And
Okay.
because when people know that, okay, we just come and just have conversations, we plan adaptation strategies for this community, and they know that it ends there after that meeting, the cycle continues.
So we need
So,
to we
yes,
need to
and
monitor a bit more.
Yes,
We
be
need
more
to engage.
intentional
Yeah. We need
with
to engage
monitoring.
stakeholders, and nothing for me without me on the table. We need to bring them to the table to discuss this. Yeah, so we need to carry them along. That's great. So we'll just take the next question. Thank you, Ruth.
Good evening, all. My name is Modibo Sadiq Ibrahim. I work with the Nigerian Atomic Energy Commission, and I also consult for the climate compatible growth. So I'll start from the right. Now, I think Blessing should furnish you with her latest publication saying that Nigeria is looking to ban importation on solar panels, particularly because Naseni has a facility that is almost $500 million USD. So maybe you should tell that guy to come to Nigeria to invest and not try to ship things
No,
into
but
Nigeria.
I had mentioned that we are looking to do by ourselves before I threw the question.
So you could just tell him to come over here rather than import that. Also from a policy point of view, obviously as a civil servant, I'm non-partisan, no political parties, And if you recall what Malam Nasir Rufai said when he was being screened, he would like to consolidate all energy agencies, be it nuclear, gas, power. And I think it's a good model to consider. Seeing that you're at the highest level of government, you should help us push these conversations. So for instance, when it comes to climate and carbon, imagine where NNPC, Ministry of Petroleum, TCN, all of us are under one cycle. So you export, say, X amount of crude oil. So you take off a certain percentage of that for climate financing, because obviously capital is a coward. It doesn't go to a place where it's not stable, where policies are not serious. So if you're taking a certain percentage coming from the carbon origination source to develop it in this country, I think it would send a very good signal. So regarding infrastructure financing, you did say you were with an infrastructure financing bank as a former DG. My question is, what is the most complex infrastructure financing project we've ever looked at in Nigeria? And how long is the span? Because from the nuclear point of view, for us, our projects are 60, 70, 80 years. So if people aren't looking towards that length of investment, obviously we cannot unlock carbon offsetting goals, because of course any transition plan is fantastic. It's good on paper, but I think frankly, with all due respect, it was done by consultants and does not reflect the reality of Nigeria. And I'm speaking as an individual, as a Nigerian citizen, not as a civil servant, not as a consultant, right? So, because of course the Chinese are very happy to do intergovernmental arrangements. They're able to perhaps take Ghana, for instance, finance a 1,000 megawatt nuclear power plant and upgrade the transmission grid. And they're happy to take the investment for a century. But Nigeria is not just doing the right policies to unlock these investment goals. And then to the barrister, fantastic submissions, of course. I might want to tackle you on the Land Use Act a bit, but let's leave that for a later.
Let it slide.
Yeah, but take this case, for instance. Say we're taking this carbon credits from, say, the NNPC, local refiners, and what have you. We have a problem with ranching. It's been a long issue, perhaps more than 2-3 decades. I'm aware Grazing Reserve Bill has gone 3-4 times to the National Assembly and failed. Of course, there are political implications, there are nuances, cultural biases, and all of that. So because it doesn't take much for a green zone where you have a grazing reserve, you don't need 250 megawatts of solar power like in Kaduna. All you need is just little solar panels for boreholes, little solar panels for like healthcare facilities and for their households, and just give the grazing, the ranchers their own place, because all of us don't want to see cattle moving on the streets of Abuja. So this is, I think, one of the realities that we could try to get into, because anyway, carbon markets need to be structured to our realities. It's a free market. For the first time in the history of development, Nigerians can now, structure a market that is best suited for them to be, aligned with what you mentioned, development plans, right? So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. So
I think the question and
So To address the question about the most complex infrastructure kind of transaction to structure, I would say energy is one of them. And that's because of the various complexities that you have to cross to be able to create a transaction that is bankable. You have to go through the regulatory approvals and the various chains of approvals that you need to get from various bureaucratic sectors, right? That's creates a problem. In the energy space also, it's very difficult to get the transactions to be bankable because you have to be talking about the PPAs, and to align the length of the PPA with the length of the funding is usually an issue. First of all, even getting a PPA that is bankable, even now that we're talking about dismantling or unbundling or restructuring NBET, right, it becomes even more difficult to get out PPAs because the bulk buyers do not really have the financial backing or the balance sheet to make the PPAs bankable. That's one. When you cross that, then the issue you're going to have is who is going to give it to energy project. The affordability, right, boils down to the length of the transaction. Because if I'm trying to recover an infrastructure project over a 20 years period, then the tariff that I'm going to charge is less than if I'm trying to recover in a 10 years period. Now, you will find out that typically to get a PPA for 10 years is difficult enough, but you're trying to raise funding to make the transaction to make the transaction affordable. You need to be looking at funding of about 20 years. So typically the biggest you will see is between 10 and 15 years to raise funding in Nigeria, and being able to navigate all of these things is the issue. Then the other reason why energy is also very difficult to do is, like I mentioned earlier, the revenue is in Naira. And most times you're trying to raise foreign currency because for the volume of transaction for the volume of investment that you need, you most likely will find that money outside. So tackling that FX risk, is another problem. Then lastly, for large scale energy projects, you really cannot do it without the government. And you know that when you're trying to bring in the government, do the PPP, then the timeline for the transaction then extends beyond. If you see what has moved fast in the energy sector is the IPPs, the people that are doing the 1 megawatt and thereabout, right? But when you want to do the big size project, what it really takes to cross all the hurdles to get the transaction to be bankable, the time is long and the complexities around some of these things that I've talked about.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This is time well spent. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But our panelists, we're happy to engage with participants right after. You can, walk up to them, but we have to, unfortunately, I wish we could stay longer, but we have to come to a close for today. It has been a very exciting discussion. We have heard that there's need for us to collaborate, right? Collaboration is key. We have heard that, balance is key. Government needs to de-risk. We need to do more. We need to engage stakeholders. We need to bring everyone on board. So it has been really very interesting. Yes, we can indeed have economic growth and still take care of our environment. We have learned that, but the word here is balance, and we can do much more. So if we the policies are there, we have heard that compliance is a big issue, but of course we have policies that to back up all this, and enforcement. The government is there. We need to tweak some of this regulations or framework that or policies that are already existing. There has to be penalties for actions, right? So if we get all this done, we can continue to grow. We need to unlock investment. If we give value, of course, the investment will come. We need to look inwards too, right? So a lot has been said today, but the key is that there is a balance, and yes, it is possible to achieve economic growth and still look after the environment. As we come to a close, I will ask Electricity Hub to come up. They will come to give a closing remark, but before they come up, while Blessing is coming up to talk to us, I will ask the panelists to just in 1 minute, just give us your closing remarks in 1 minute, and we will start from Olumide so that I'm fair to Ruth, right?
Okay, yeah, I'll make it 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that ultimately what we have here is an opportunity. We should see the energy transition as an opportunity to do things better. It helps us to maybe be a bit more introspective as a country, especially with the global dynamic around finance nowadays, to look inwards and see how we can increase productivity in the country and advance technologically. I think one of the things that we could gain from the energy transition is how to domesticate technology and take advantage of technology transfer. I mean, finance is very important for the transition as well, but I think a lot of innovation in the country will be required for us to use what we have to successfully balance livelihoods with energy transition. And I think without saying more than that, I will just pass it on to my.
Thank you.
My closing remark will be that I think the biggest challenge we have in Africa and especially in Nigeria in closing transaction is being able to structure the transactions to be bankable. From where I sit, there is a whole lot of investors that are seeking for where to invest. However, the way our landscape and the policies and all make it difficult to be able to make those investments bankable, and that's the reason why we are not attracting the funding. So we need to do a lot more around that so that we can actually attract the funding that we need to develop our country.
Okay, thank you. And then over to you.
Okay, thank you. In summary, we've seen that Nigeria has, quite a number of legislations, but enforcement, it's a challenge. So I would say we need to actually strengthen the Climate Change Act to include adaptation financing, very important. That's one. And I would say that we need to expand our climate finance mechanism by collaborating well with the Development Bank of Nigeria, since we now have a DFI that is accredited with the Green Climate Fund. And I think with this, strengthening enforcement, strengthening our climate legislations, expanding our collaborations with DBN, we can bridge that gap between policy and action. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, that was well said. So at this time, I will ask the representative of the, okay, she's just here. I've been looking everywhere to come over.
Good evening, everyone. As we conclude today's event, we want to appreciate our panelists for contributing their valuable insights and contributions, and also to the participants. Thank you for engaging in this wonderful discussion. See you at the 105th Power Dialogue. Thank you very much. We have refreshments behind. Thank you and good night.
Take all your questions.